Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. In this episode, join us as we take flight with The Crow and discuss the tragic final role of actor Brandon Lee. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dean Legiro behind the microphone. Eric Kuber, are you there?
I'm here. How
There
are
he
you?
is. I knew he was here.
Yes, indeed.
And making his hat trick appearance, if you're into the whole hockey thing, there's the hockey term for you, is Andrew Cremeans, making his third appearance.
I'm going to have to start paying rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have to start giving you like clerical duties.
Nice.
Welcome, Andy.
How you doing, Andy?
I am fabu. Thank you very much for asking.
You had a big weekend this weekend.
I did. My lovely wife and I celebrated our 28th anniversary.
Wow.
Congrats.
And we went and saw Big Bad Voodoo Daddy for probably the 16th time, and got to hang out with them for a little while because we were kind of friendly with a couple of the guys from the band, and it was great. They're always good, never fail. And Eric, you and I have seen them together a couple times. They're just
Yeah,
I love them because they've got all the power of like a rock and roll like metal band, but it's a big band and it like shakes the floor because it's so cool, man.
They're fantastic.
And if you haven't listened to any of our previous episodes, Andy is an artist, a graphic artist as well, par excellence, and he has done some work for Big Bad Voodoo Daddy.
He has indeed,
right?
And
done some posters.
I got to meet him. You took me to one show, and that was they seem like a really great bunch of guys, and they're absolutely genuine in what they do. They're not just a sort of kitschy kind of thing. They're dedicated to the music they play, and they're really into it. And fantastic
cool.
band.
Yeah, I was talking to Dirk, the bass player, the most, and I was talking to him like, how does it feel to be 1 degree away from the entire Marvel universe and the entire Star Wars universe? Because they were in Swingers with Jon Favreau.
Yeah.
The whole last scene of which was autobiographical. They apparently Favreau was always hanging out at the Derby where they would play, and he's like, "Hey, I'm making this movie. Come, hang out, whatever." So they got to know Jon Favreau, and now Favreau's doing Marvel and DC, Marvel and Star Wars. So it's crazy, man.
Everything, pretty much.
Yeah.
He truly is the master of the universe.
Sure, surely.
So yeah, Andy's making his third appearance, and if you want to check out what he does as a full-time living, we're part-time podcasters. He's a full-time artist. You can find him on Instagram at Andrew Cremeans Art on Instagram. So give him a follow, give him a like. He's always got a lot of interesting stuff. He just released some of the art for the latest Spooky Empire. We touched on that during our top 3 episode as well. So he's a very prolific artist, a lot of great work. So kudos, Andy. Go check him out. Andrew Cremeans Art on Instagram. So we are talking about, this is the final episode of our 2021 Spooktober Halloween-themed lineup of episodes, and we are talking about the film The Crow. And yeah, this one came out in 1994. Let me roll the stats, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about it. There's a lot of tragedy beyond Brandon Lee, but so this film is just kind of saturated in it, unfortunately. But what came out of it is also something special. So this was released in 1994, directed by Alex Proyas, based on the graphic novel by James O'Barr. The budget for this film, a paltry $23 million at the time.
Mm.
Box office return on it was $94 million. That's worldwide, so it did very well for it. Well, let me roll out the cast or a good portion of the cast. We won't do them all, but we've got Brandon Lee, Ernie Hudson, Michael Wincott, David Patrick Kelly, Bai Ling, Michael Massey, and Rochelle Davis. And I think those are really the main players in this film. And like I'd said in the opening, this would be the final film for actor Brandon Lee. If you don't know, he is the son of martial arts movie star and martial artist Bruce Lee. He was Bruce Lee's only son, and Bruce Lee also had a daughter, Shannon. Brandon Lee was killed on set. It was only about 8 days worth of filming to go, and he only had maybe 3 to do. And an unfortunate, really set of horrible and neglectful circumstances led to his untimely passing. He was was supposed to be shot with a prop gun, and they had taken a bullet out of the gun, and kind of, they didn't have the right props with them. So the prop department kind of finagled something, and a bullet tip ended up getting lodged in the gun. And then they reloaded the gun with a blank for the next shot. And that blank had powder in it, and it propelled the bullet that was stuck inside the gun. Absolutely tragic. Should never have happened. But again, so that kind of cast really a shadow over this film of tragedy, and it mirrored, Bruce Lee died. He passed away just on the cusp of superstardom, although he made a lot of films. Enter the Dragon was going to be his big one. Was working on footage which would become Game of Death, which they would use body doubles and stand-ins for to complete that film. Although Game of Death was like test footage and was just kind of fooling around with ideas, they actually ended up cobbling it together into a film. This kind of same thing happened after Brandon Lee passed. It's like, well, the movie is pretty much done.
Yeah, luckily they got most of it done, though. I mean, just a few shots, so they had to CG his likeness onto a stunt double, and it just a couple of scenes, and boy, it would have been a completely different film had he not filmed more than half of the scenes. If they didn't show up in the film of somebody else doing it, you would have definitely noticed.
Yeah, like in Game of Death, where you could tell, like they put a guy in the costume Bruce Lee was wearing, but they'd put a motorcycle helmet on him. At the time when they did the face replacement for Brandon Lee in a couple of scenes, I mean, this was before deep fake, so that was kind of cutting edge at the time what they were trying to do. Yeah. To kind of complete the film, and they got kind of clever with some of the existing footage that they had and recycling it and doing the best they could. And it is a complete film, so by no means was this something that has a patched together feel, because it certainly wasn't. The film was mostly done. There really wasn't a lot left, but they decided to to honor Brandon Lee's work and to complete the film.
I think there were a few. Yeah, I'm sorry, Andy. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, I think that there's a couple of scenes that were pushed a little bit more artistic, like the scene where he's flashing when he first puts on the makeup. Mm-hmm. It's somebody completely but I mean, his face is always in shadow, and I think it brings the romantic.
Absolutely, sure,
visual to it. So I mean, it's almost. Of course, we don't want him to die, but it brought a creative.
It lends something to it. Yeah,
lends something to it. But there's also, there were only a couple of scenes left, but he was actually, we might talk about this later, but he signed for a 3-picture deal. And originally in the story, he was supposed to not be able to go back to Shelley because he helped. There's this whole subplot that we'll talk about later about the Skull Cowboy, and there was these rules and stuff, and he wasn't supposed to help the living. Yeah. And every time he helped the living, he got weaker and weaker. And by the end, he was supposed to not be able to go back to Shelley. He was supposed to roam the earth for 2 more movies. So him not being able to finish the movie actually put a cap on the story, which I think is so much better. I mean, yeah. So there's a lot of serendipitous good things that are happening in the tragedy.
It's funny how
it's absolutely it's one of the most tragic films, again, because of and Andy's going to walk us through the graphic novel as well, and I think that's the important thing, is that this whole story comes from that. So why don't we start there, and we start with this graphic novel by James O'Barr.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I was a ridiculous fan, which is I went a little overboard in high school with this movie and this story. And as Eric's lovely wife, Kelly, can attest to this, how much of a pain in the ass I was about this movie in high school. Cause I was the Crow all the time. Like I was the Crow for Halloween, like 4 years in a row. I used to draw them all. I listened to the soundtrack on a loop. I was just a huge fan of the comic book before it came out. And my wife and I were our high school sweethearts. And the movie came out about 8 or 9 months after we started dating. So the tragic angle of losing your one true love was so upsetting and scary. And, because, when you're in high school, everything's so important and potentially
magnified.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Potentially autobiographical when you're a teenager, but
this is the 90s.
Angle, yeah.
And this is the 90s. So we're, yeah.
The vengeance angle, like as a vehicle to say, just injustice can happen, but it can always be corrected with bloody violence, is always good for a teenager too. But yeah, I mean, like all these years later, it's kind of an immature story when you think about it. Like it feels like a young person who didn't know how to deal with grief wrote it, and of course that's what happened. The comic was written by James O'Barr when his fiance was killed by a drunk driver, and the tragedy of Brandon Lee, of course, was engaged, and he was buried 10 days before his wedding was supposed to happen, and it's just so tragic and romantic, not like in the intimacy type romantic. I mean, like tragically poetic sort of thing. It's just like this thing. But I mean, the comic book was from Caliber Press originally, and it was a comic book that was really underground, really black and white, really DIY. This guy, J.O. Barr, I've met him a couple of times, and he's very quiet, very troubled kind of guy, and he had a hell of a life too. I mean, the tragedy starts way before that. He was abandoned as a baby, and went from orphanage to foster home, and wasn't adopted until he was 7. And he gets adopted and meets this girl who turns his life completely around because he was very angry about life. Like some of the foster parents he had were not nice people and stuff. And he meets this girl who's just like the light of his life, who like was always the light to his dark. And he's just they dated for 3 years, and they got engaged, and she was killed by a drunk driver. And he used this comic book as an outlet for his grief. But he also was inspired by the story that he read about a couple who was killed for a $30 engagement ring. And he's just like, man, the life of two people for $30, And so he's like inspired, and he's tragic, and everything's tragic, and he's upset, and he's writing this book. And the book itself is very poetic. Like it'll have a couple of chapters, and then like violence and all this stuff is happening, and then there's just a poem on a page. And then there's a whole page of just a chair. And then it's like, it goes to, a lovely flashback of him and his wife. And then it'll go back to the bloody violence and stuff like that. It's like this, he is so dealing with his grief through this, and the biggest differences in the book and the movie are obviously how Eric and Shelley die. And they die, they go to an engagement party, and their car breaks down on the side of the road, and the gang pulls over and pulls him out and shoots him in the back of the head, execution style. And he, falls on the ground, and he's paralyzed, but he's not dead. So he just lays there on his side, and watches all of this horrific things happen to his wife, who gets killed in front of him. But he lives for a little bit longer into the hospital. But you don't know who these people are. Eric's not a rock star. You don't know who Shelley is. There's no last names. There's, if anything, he might be a dancer. I don't know, because there's these odd dance sequences.
I think in the commentary on the Blu-ray, I think Proyas had mentioned that he was a handyman. So he had he was just a regular guy. Yeah, the notion that he was just an everyman type character. So yeah, the fact that he turned him into a rock star lent itself, that had everything to do with the music in the film. So yeah, so I think
that was one of the cheesier aspects of the movie. Just him carrying a guitar around and
definitely a stylistic choice of. I mean, this movie is very much of the 90s. I mean, it came out in 94, and upon watching it again, it was. I remember when everything happened, when Brandon Lee passed away, and this movie was being made. So. We were right in the thick of it as moviegoers, as Eric and I, as big movie fans, and kind of waiting for this movie to come out. And I'd seen Rapid Fire before that, which was the film he had made before. So he was kind of up and coming. This kind of this would have been the big one. And like you said, this was a cathartic process for James O'Barr, or at least an attempt at catharsis of kind of exercising those demons that he had over the death of his wife, and putting literally ink to paper via drawings and via text to kind of get this out. And the story is really kind of like a modern kind of gothic tale. I mean, for lack of a better term, in its stylization as well on the page, and what they translated into film. So, so I'm guessing you said Andy, you said you were the Crow like for every year. So you pretty much saw it when it came out. Then that was like for you, like right there.
Oh, leading up to it, it was like anticipation. Like I had the catalog, like back before the internet, you had to like get catalogs to this kitchen sink press had like rings and books and card games and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I was obsessed. But like just to wrap up the comic book, like he was based on Peter Murphy from Bauhaus and the body of Iggy Pop. So some of the frames of the comic book, he's just traced pictures of Iggy Pop, just kind of that distorted, skinny, muscular kind of thing going on. Yeah. Music was like huge. It was huge. And for him to make the book, he was listening to a lot of Joy Division and, Iggy Pop and all that stuff as well. So it's like music is like ingrained in it. There's even like song lyrics in the book. He quotes songs in the book when he cuts the poetry and stuff. So, but Brandon Lee,
tailor made to be adapted into a film. Then, I mean, that was the thing.
Yeah.
Just a brief synopsis of the film is, there's a couple, Eric Draven and his girlfriend Shelley, and they live in a kind of a tenement apartment. And basically there's a crime lord that they're trying to kind of gentrify these areas or get people out, or so they can continue their criminal enterprises. These two people get killed on Devil's Night, which is the night before Halloween. Shelley is brutalized by this gang of thugs, and Brandon Lee's character is pitched out the window. A year later, on Devil's Night, he comes back. He's kind of resurrected with the aid of his kind of spirit guide, as it were, which is a crow. For the sole purpose of, like Andy said, is the sole purpose. His only mission is to avenge the death of him and his girlfriend, his fiancée. It's the only way they can really find any type of peace. So basically this happens over the course of one night, where he is kind of going and working his way through the gang on this mission and being guided and still trying to also figure out what happened to him and what he is. So a very compelling story. How much how different was the novel from the book? I mean, how much from the novel from the book? How much different was the graphic novel from the film?
Well, the heart is there. Brandon Lee actually was the biggest advocate for bringing more of the novel into, like, on set. He'd bring the comic book and he'd be like, listen, this scene is good, but like there's this really cool thing he says in the comic. And they were using the comic, the scene with Gideon's pawn shop. It's almost storyboarded out of the comic book. It's like they even got, it's the guy's hat says Gideon in the same kind of lettering and stuff as the comic book. And it is so good. I mean, like it's almost shot for shot. It's mainly the whole Devil's Night thing, and the apartment complex and that sort of stuff isn't really a thing. It's more grungy, just Detroit slum, and these people are like, Eric and Shelley are nobody, and most of the bad guys are nobody except for Top Dollar, but he's still like just a criminal. It's not like 90s glorified,
a little more mystical. This Top Dollar is a little more mystical or open to believing something that's mystical, but also a realist. Because he's got Micah, which is his sister or his half sister, and she's kind of into the whole occult thing and the
very, very perverse things happen.
Yeah, the stuff that they do. But so he Top Dollar is played by the great Michael Wincott, who's got the voice that launched 1,000 packs of Marlboro cigarettes.
Yeah. He's great.
He's got the deepest and graveliest voice. So tailor-made. He was in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves as Guy of Gisborne. He was in The Doors as Paul Rothschild. So he's got that. He's a character actor who's got a great gravelly voice and just a really great actor to kind of lead the bad guys. And then among the bad guys as well, I think as far as actors goes, we need to make mention of David Patrick Kelly, who is who
was
plays
best
T-Bird.
known for his role in The Warriors. And we know him as Sully from Commando, which was
and from Dreamscape
and
as
Dreamscape.
well with Dennis Quaid. And yeah, Sully, most big, I guess, biggest claim to fame is being dangled upside down by Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando. And he said, you said you were going to kill me last, and Arnold drops him and says, I lied. In Commando.
He's got a great voice too.
Oh yeah, he does.
Such a great actor, and he I think he's having some really serious actors in this film helps ground it as well. Again, because there are some actors in this that
absolutely
that kind of or maybe the characters are drawn a little bit too broadly, like the character of Skank is just a little too out there.
Yeah, he's not
and I think the characters that are a little bit more grounded, like T-Bird is grounded in reality, and even Fun Boy is a little more grounded in reality. He's just a heroin addict.
Heroin addict. He's just like out there, and some props that need to go to other actors such as Tony Todd, who plays Top Dollar's like right hand man, his lieutenant. He's probably the only guy he's got it all together. He's wearing the nice suits, and these other guys are just like wild and going off and doing their thing. But I've always admired Tony Todd. He's always been a favorite of mine, especially in the 90s range where he did Candyman. He did the remake of Night of the Living Dead. I love him as Worf's brother, Kern, on Star Trek and Deep Space Nine. He played Klingon. He also played an adult Jake Sisko in a really touching episode of DS9, which I loved. So a really great actor I admired. And then, of course,
he's got a great voice, too.
Yeah, he's got that gravitas to his voice. And then you got the great Anna Thompson, who plays the little girl's mother in this film. And she's
Darla,
and she was also in Unforgiven. She was the reason that this ridiculous situation unfolds in Unforgiven. She was the cut up prostitute that everybody, that this whole situation unfolds and it becomes, absurd and really brings out the worst in everyone. But in this particular case, she's also every bit as much of the victim as she was in that film. Because she's caught up in this world. She's addicted to drugs. She's not a very good mom. And that's probably one of my favorite scenes in the film is when he comes in and takes care of Fun Boy.
Oh,
and, Fun Boy, and they're shooting up, and then he brings her into the bathroom, and he says to her, he quotes that thing about, the mother is, whatever. And she's just, and I want to ask you, Annie, at that particular moment when he grabs her arm, and there are, you see the heroin like just kind of dripping out of her arm. Is he doing that to her? Is he like cleansing her at that moment, or is it just?
No, I think it's just supposed to be gross. When he says mother is the name for God on the lips and hearts of all children. He that whole scene specifically, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. They something really important was supposed to happen in that scene. Like the most famous part of the Crow, that costume that you see, is him with his arms taped up with electrician's tape and the tape around his
torso
section, torso and stuff like that. And it just kind of appears halfway through the movie. But it was a really important part. As we were saying, there was a scene cut. There was a kind of a spirit guide called the Skull Cowboy that kind of slowed the plot down, so they took him out. But he was explaining that, like, you are completely invulnerable as long as you are here to kick ass and chew bubblegum. But the second that you help anybody living, you're going to start losing your power and you become mortal, sort of thing. So he does little things here and there. And just by stopping to help Darla and like help her go be a mom, he gets weak for a minute. And he had just Fun Boy was out on the couch, or no, but Fun Boy was in the bathtub. Yeah, he was supposed to spring up behind him and start stabbing him and slashing him with a razor. And then there was this fight scene that happened, and like Brandon Lee, or the Crow, was like cut up in his wrist and his midsection and all this stuff, and he was actually bleeding and not healing because he had started to help Darla, and that started like the chain of events that started to make him mortal toward the end of the movie. But they cut that scene out. So Another just a important thing I wanted to say earlier about the character himself. I remember everybody thinking that he was supposed to look like Alice Cooper. Like, why has he got Alice Cooper makeup on?
Yeah.
And it is Alice Cooper's like kind of makeup or whatever. But I remember thinking that too. But like in the comic book, he just puts the black on. He's dead, so he doesn't have to paint his face white. It's just black makeup. But he has. It's also in the movie, but it's very prominent in the comic book. There's a scene where one of the happier flashbacks, they're painting their brand new apartment because they're moving in together. And it's just like one of those goofy moments where he spills paint, I love you, and they're hugging. And you see these 3 mime masks, kind of like the theater masks, but they're more mime masks, the happy, sad, something else mask or whatever. There's 3 of them on the wall. And there's a shot where you kind of see one by itself. And then in the movie, when he goes back to the apartment and he puts the makeup on or whatever, one of the mime masks that are also in a previous flashback in the movie, they're the same exact masks are on his bedroom wall when he was alive, but only one mask remain on the mirror when he's putting the makeup on. So it's basically like him remembering something important to him or something beautiful to him, and that's why he paints himself. He remembers the masks because those are part of a happy moment.
Yeah, they call to that in the movie because there's that Harlequin or mime mask on the mirror, and then that's when he starts kind of going through the drawers of the dresser and gets the makeup out and then kind of gets that iconic look going on his face.
What doesn't make sense though is like in the sequels, they keep doing it, and it's like unless all of them had a mime mask, it doesn't make any sense. Like in the comic book, there's some comic books that have it, but there was one comic book that was really cool. This woman named Iris Shaw, she was one of the Crows. There's a lot of the Crows spinoffs in the comic books. She comes back and she's got like a crow on her nose, like nose and eyes, almost like Kiss makeup. It's really cool.
Yeah.
The mime thing on other people just doesn't make any sense at all.
We're for the purposes of this episode, we will not address or acknowledge
the sequels,
any of the sequels, because I saw The Crow 2 in heavy anticipation when it came out, and I'm like, oh boy, that was a mistake.
I didn't even bother.
They should have let it go. So let's talk about the film. I mean, just quickly, Alex Proyas, is not a big. This was a big film for him, and he kind of caught lightning in a bottle. He followed up with a movie called Dark City, which was very gothic also, and kind of dark and really weird and sci-fi, and then kind of has only made a handful of films, and the most recent one was Gods of Egypt. So not a prolific director, and he really kind of didn't really have a lot of hits after this. It was just kind of some films, and he did I, Robot, which was like, all right, but that was it. Just a handful of films, not a whole lot. A lot of music videos before he became a feature film director.
Watching it again in prep for this, that was just kind of like, wow, I can't believe how amazingly beautiful this movie is, and just I was actually captivated by it, from beginning to end, and of course the great Brandon Lee. You just can't take your eyes off the guy. I mean, he just makes every frame. He brings this movie alive. The physicality of his performance is bar none. I mean, I can't imagine. And it's not like he came to this with a lot of fancy martial arts and that kind of thing. And, kung fu, every scene, it's like, it's not even, doesn't feel choreographed. It feels like it's just a lot of running and jumping and a lot of just doing what he has to do to kind of get the job done. And it absolutely works as the chaos in the film, but it's a controlled chaos that works really, really well. I feel
it's even more tragic to me how good he was, because there's no question he would have been the biggest thing after this movie, or on his way at least. I mean, he was a great actor. He enveloped into the character. He was the character. Like it's inseparable to me.
He would have been a great filmmaker too, because he was really apparently very interested in directing. He was already, choreographing all the fights, and really. I mean, there were several fight scenes in the film that didn't make it to the film that he had, planned out and conceived and never got there. Maybe tested a few out with Proyas, and they just didn't like the way it came out. So you pretty much got what you got. But man, what you got was perfect.
Yeah, he was very invested in the role, and invested in the process as well, which was kind of important. And that was, you spoke about the you know, he wasn't doing kung fu. I mean, you've got his father casts a really big shadow. So as soon as you say, oh, Bruce Lee's son, you're immediately going to think that. And the previous film, Rapid Fire, kind of was a little bit more in that vein. But I think one of the specific things I read about this as Brandon Lee is he didn't want the Crow or Eric Draven to have a specific style because he wasn't trained. He was a guy that got resurrected, and is kind of figuring out his powers as he goes. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't like this superhero beforehand that's now resurrected and used like Arnold, you know, just kind of using his commando skills or anybody else, right? He's just a guy that has these powers, and he's got a specific mission that he needs to carry out. And that's all there is to it. You know, it's kind of that's the simple part of this story. It's quite simple of, you know, a kind of a man on a mission. And you mentioned the rain-soaked streets. You know, I think this owes a lot to in one of our previous episodes, our top 3, we talked a lot about Edgar Allan Poe and the Gothic films of like the 60s. I think there's a through line from those to the look of this film. It's definitely got the modern Gothic look, mm-hmm. with just the sets. You know, of course, you add rain. If it's raining constantly, that automatically sets like a tone, right? It's got kind of the seven feel to it, which is like everyone kind of owes a little nod or
heavy sense of noir. That sort of,
it's got that overhanging just feeling of heaviness, and this is just a depressed area, and it's a depressing life that these people lead because it's just always like nothing good ever happens. So I think setting the stage like that kind of sets the tone, and it kind of puts you squarely in this universe of these people that are just, it's just, you know, there doesn't seem to be any hope or nothing to hope for.
Yeah, and there's a fairy tale aspect to it that gets really kind of warped while you're flying over with the Crow, you know, the Crow view, bird's eye view of Detroit.
Crow vision.
I never realized this when I saw it in the theater or VHS until I just saw it in HD. The entire city is a miniature.
Yeah.
Like there's like one street and then everything else is a miniature. And there's even a car chase with miniature cars. Like there's one shot where I actually like, whoa, are you kidding? I can't believe I noticed.
Is that the overhead shot?
Well, there's one. It's a side shot that's 2 Matchbox cars going by.
Proy has said this in the commentary. He said most of the shots were miniature because they just didn't simply have the budget for a big car chase. B being that there wasn't enough room on the set, so they used a lot of miniatures. So there were quite a bit of miniatures were used for this film, and
it has an interesting look. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
It
has,
there's
especially when
shots
you see
where. Yeah, sorry, Eric.
There's the shots of Brandon Lee like jumping off the rooftops from rooftop to rooftop. It kind of has that sort of cut and paste look to it.
Yeah.
You can tell it's a miniature in the background, but such a cool effect of him just sort of this real figure sort of jumping around on this it almost looks like he's really jumping on a miniature set. And it has a really, I guess because the lighting is so dark and the rain and you know, so it kind of masks the unreality of it, but it just looks so freaking cool. And I was like, wow, this is something that doesn't necessarily look real, but it's still very visceral and very like, you know, you feel like you can reach out and grab it, as opposed to a lot of the films today, which I'm not downing at all, but it's just, you know, it's nice to return to this kind of thing where, you know, they had to use this kind of stuff. You know, the filmmaking of the time was just
I think that the difference or the contrast is look at the look of Batman Returns, right? Which went for the same feel, but Batman Returns looks like a soundstage. Every single shot looks like it looks like a set.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas in The Crow, it took me out of the film. I'm like, this is a set. It looks too, even though it's gray and supposedly dingy, it looked too clean and too sharp. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you could tell it's a soundstage. Whereas in The Crow, it looks like a lived in, grungy, dirty place. And you get a sense for the scope of it. Whereas in like Batman Returns, you just saw like kind of these scenes and they nothing felt like it was connected. So by having those miniatures and having that opening shot where the fires are burning and you see like the kind of like the flyover shot of the city, it kind of gives you a feel for the scope, even if it's a miniature. You know, it's like they did a great job with it. And that was the whole point, is to kind of really set the feeling for this movie. And they really achieved that through the lack of lighting, through the use of the rain. You know, it kind of creates its own little world and its own little universe of how this area is. And it's just not a nice place to be. It's just kind of depressing, foreboding. And, you know, the cinematography and the sets just kind of state that for you. If no one ever, if this was a silent film, you would still get that feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Nightmare on Elm Street 4 came out, Rennie Harlan directed it, and all of the reviews were talking about how this is Nightmare on Elm Street for the MTV generation. It's because he was a music video director before that movie and stuff, and it was very MTV like. And like, I keep thinking about that with this movie. Like, this movie is that on crack. Like, it is straight up MTV. It's like MTV noir sort of thing, you know, like even like especially like the club trash, you know, where My Life with Throwco Cult's playing, and like there's people, you know, goth people dancing, and then there's a guy conveniently, you know, like using power tools above the stage so sparks keep flowing everywhere, you know. But I mean, it's so goth MTV noir feel to it, and again, the music, there, not only the music for the soundtrack, but Graham Revell's
the incidental score absolutely has a part of it. It figures heavily into it.
Yeah,
I used to listen to that. I think he did the Last Temptation of Christ soundtrack as well. I'm not 100% sure, but I used to listen to that and the Crow soundtrack when I drew. It's it's almost Native American in some parts of it. You know, it's very, well, I guess it makes sense with the...
and that might have been a choice of necessity, because in the first part of the first section of the film, you really is the stuff with the doubles and the replacements for Brandon Lee, and they were using whatever footage they had. So there wasn't a lot of dialogue or talking, and they had to rework some of those scenes. So they were very music heavy, meaning the music was kind of in the background driving what was going on until they got to the point where they had the footage of Brandon Lee as the Crow. But that whole beginning scene when he's resurrected and finding his way back to the apartment, there's no speaking whatsoever, and it's just soundtrack driven, you know, up until when he becomes the Crow and the lightning flashes and you see his face, you know, the replacement. So yeah, the soundtrack, you're right, it's kind of got that. You forget about the MTV generation and the effect it also had on filmmaking, and this has that feel. You're totally right. And then of course when they're in the club, it's, you know, and Alex Proyas came from music video, so he brings that sensibility to it. Yeah. You know, that kind of music video director's eye to it with quick cuts and all that kind of stuff as well.
It's also the editing in this film is phenomenal. It's just so good, so well done. So, you know, just close-ups to wide shots. I mean, it's just so fast, so quickly, how it goes from one thing to another, and it flows. Even with the music, putting the music in there, and it feels, the music doesn't exactly it doesn't jump out at you like a song playing over, you know, it doesn't overwhelm me. It's part of the soundscape of the film. It's like in the background, it's blended in. And sometimes you can't even tell when one song ends and the other one begins. It almost feels like one long song in a sense in certain scenes, because it's just like, you know, because it just keeps, you're so captivated by everything else that you just, this music is just underlining everything that's going on. It's so well done.
So for me, the soundtrack came out a couple months before the movie, and I was like obsessively going over the soundtrack and stuff like that. So I was conscious of I was thinking, where are they going to use this? Where are they going to use this or whatever? And I think that the Cure song "Burn" specifically was written for the movie. James O'Barr was listening to a bunch of guys like Joy Division and stuff, and he did a song called Joy Division did a song called "Dead Souls" that they asked that he quotes in the book, and then they asked Nine Inch Nails to do the remake for the soundtrack. But the song "Burn" from the Cure, I wasn't a Cure fan before this soundtrack came out. It is perfect. It is the perfect soundtrack to this to the story. So much so that he quotes the book in the lyrics. The very first lyric in the song is "Don't look, don't look," and all throughout the book. Okay, so when Eric gets shot, he gets plopped down on the ground and he's paralyzed, but he's watching his wife being brutalized, and the Crow jumps in front of him and his wife, like in between, and he keeps saying, "Don't look, Eric, don't look," because It's only going to make it worse.
Yeah.
And he keeps looking, and he's like, why are you doing this to yourself? And then there's scenes in the book later on when he's back and he's in the middle of vengeance, and he'd take a break and go back to the house or the apartment where they were. He's just sitting there, literally cutting himself in torment because he misses her so much, and he keeps flashing back. And the crow is saying to him, like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like, you could go end this right now. You could go kill them all and be done with this, but you're sitting here torturing yourself, remembering all of this stuff. So the song Burn, don't look, the shadows breathe, whispering me away from you. Don't wake at night to watch her sleep, because you know you will always lose. There's scenes in the book where there's no words. It's just him watching her sleep, like in bed, them laying next to each other, flashbacks and stuff. That song is just chef's kiss. I love that song so much for that movie.
But
So
didn't he quote Cure songs
just
in the book too? I mean, like, didn't they kind of return the favor, I guess, by writing the song for the film? That's pretty cool. Yeah. I know there's...
I mean, it's the soundtrack is a who's who of kind of grunge and alt rock of the time, right? I mean, it very much informs the feel of the film, because they really use that as a centerpiece at, like I said, at the club. They've got the bands playing and the music is playing there. So it's in the universe and it's in the film, but then it's also used in the soundtrack as well, which is pretty neat. So let's jump back a little bit, because you said when the crow was talking to Eric in the graphic novel, like, why don't you go kill these guys? Let's talk about that in the film. Let's talk about the guys that get killed in this film, because it's pretty, like that's the whole thing that this movie kind of is balanced on, is him finding these guys, exacting his vengeance so he can finally rest as well and kind of complete this mission. And the first person he meets from this gang, because this gang is 4 guys. Basically, there's Tintin, Fun Boy, Skank, and T-Bird. And T-Bird is the leader of this gang. And these guys are a bunch of misfits. I mean, I don't know how their big thing is, burning up arcades and blowing up, arcades and whatnot. So it's kind of funny. They're really low level, but they're the ones that really kill Eric and Shelley. So Eric, as the crow, first encounters Tintin. And I love the crow vision, because the crow is kind of like the seeker and the guide, and he sees things through the crow's eyes of where people are, what's going on, and then kind of is able to react to it. So the crow actually is as important to this story, the actual crow.
It's kind of like the Beastmaster, right? Remember that movie with Eric Singer?
Yeah. So,
it's kind of like, I love that.
The crow vision is really what, and I love the sequences of the crow flying too. I just love how they did that. It's just some really great cinematography. But Eric Draven first encounters Tintin, and his specialty is knives, and he's a knife thrower, and kind of I guess along the lines of Hawkeye and doesn't miss kind of guy. Yeah. It's a really great scene. It's got a lot of rage in it, because the thing with Eric Draven also is whenever he touches anybody associated with this, he gets memories, he gets flashbacks, he gets emotions. He relives some of these things. So when he comes in contact with these thugs, he's also reliving their point of view on these things. So, and which is somewhat uncomfortable, but Tintin tries chucking his knives, and it's not going to work on the crow. And it got one of the great lines before Tintin meets his end. It's one of my favorite lines.
Yeah,
is victims, aren't we all?
We all. And it's such a great scene too, because this is his first kill, and he doesn't really know how to use his powers yet. It's important to realize that with each kill, he becomes more and more comfortable in the role of what he's doing, and the madness is setting in, and he's actually enjoying it. You can definitely tell by the second or third kill that he's got it all together, and he knows exactly what he needs to do. Here, it's just a little, but seeing the pleasure on his face and just every emotion, you feel the pain, you feel him when he's laughing, that eerie laugh, when he kind of throws himself off the building and he lands in the trash, and he's just like, he starts, like laughing maniacally. And then the scene where he just comes into frame when it's kind of the fire, and it's so oh my God, it's just so cool. Like, it's just, you feel every moment of his performance, and he doesn't even need to say anything. It's just the way he
Yeah,
stands, the way,
it's a combination of the visuals and
yeah,
His first kill is he's sad, like he's saying murderer, like he's
yeah,
calling him a murderer, whereas later on in the movie he's just offing people. He just doesn't, like he's coming to terms with it.
Well, yeah, when he goes to see Fun Boy, that one's almost comedic because he gets shot, and he's like, tell me if you heard this one before, and he's telling him the joke about Jesus walks into a bar, and yeah, he's carrying the guitar around the second time and kind of popping in and out of windows. So yeah, he's kind of, like Eric said, is kind of coming into his own with what's going on, and I guess kind of accepting it, because there is that that underlying underpinning of what happened. And Ernie Hudson's character, Albrecht, which we didn't really talk about, was the cop that was on the beat the night they got killed. And he stayed with Shelley, and he's got memories as well. Yeah. That Eric, that the Crow accesses when they meet, and finally convinces him that this is happening, that, are you a ghost? Are you not a ghost? So when he meets Fun Boy, yeah, he's kind of more in the mode of, okay, yeah, this is what I need to be doing. I'm going to get to these guys, and I've got these powers, so I'm a little less worried about something happening. I can get shot a couple times and be good with it. And that one, it's kind of each character meets their end based on like what their character's thing is. So Tintin was knives, so he got killed by knives. Fun Boy is basically a heroin addict, so he got like a chest full of
all the heroin.
Yeah, full of hypodermic needles. Yep. It was funny when T-Bird goes to see Top Dollar, who's Michael Wincott, to explain what happened to, T-Bird got himself perished. Yeah. It's like someone stuck knives in all of his organs in alphabetical order. It's just like, so like matter of fact, he's like the most realistic and grounded character.
He got killed way too fast, in my opinion. I would have loved to have seen him to
save him to the end.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's why and that's the thing. Normally you say, okay, we'll get like the lowest level guys, and he's like he would be the top leader of the gang. So I thought it was interesting that they turned it on his head, because he was the third one to go. And I think his scene was the most powerful. I mean, David Patrick Kelly, I mean, his death scene after the car chase, and he's in the car, and it was like a realization, you kept saying, like, this is the really real world. This is the really, like, this kind of stuff doesn't happen. As depraved and as of a horrible person as I am, and how evil I am, this doesn't happen. Like, that's right.
And he's
like,
scared.
Speak to me, like, talk to me. Like,
what do you want?
Yeah, such a great performance, because it was kind of like afraid and then kind of accepting, and knew that he was just a really horrible person. And T-Bird liked to play with explosives and make things go boom. And he got launched off the dock, and his trunk full of explosives kind of sent him off and gave him some fireworks. But all these characters, just so each one of them kind of meets their end at the hands of the Crow. And it's kind of, and Skank was kind of like, is like the last one. That scene is the only scene I think I have a problem with in this whole entire film. At the end, when Skank is hiding with Top Dollar, so they're going to kind of lure the Eric in to do it. It becomes like a gun fest. Yeah, that kind of seemed out of place with everything else that happened before.
But I don't think it meant to happen that way, because if you recall, he just wants Skank.
Yeah,
he's not after Top Dollar. He's like, I want him, and I'm done. Like, that's the thing. It's like, and then it turns into this John Woo.
Yeah, I think from a director, I mean, from like a story and a director standpoint, I think just when they went over the top with the guns, I'm like, kind of like, it seemed out of place for everything else that was happening.
I don't know. I mean, I think it would Top Dollar would enforce that kind of thing. He's like, you can't have him. You got to get through me. Kind of thing, so who are you kind of thing, so I didn't have a problem with it. How about you, Andy? What's your...
it's one of my, there's 2 or 3 shots in the movie that gives me goosebumps, and one of them is a 2-second shot at the beginning of that scene. They're doing their thing or whatever, and this happens, and then it just cuts to him, and he's like, gentlemen.
And
he's walking to, just that shot, I remember getting goosebumps in the theater, like, oh snap. It's about to go down.
Yep. Kind of like when kind of like in Batman in the Dark Knight when the Joker makes his entrance, right? Kind of the same thing. Kind of comes into a room full of bad guys and kind of like, okay, here it is. He's on.
Mm-hmm.
That scene and the him pushing the church doors open is just it's a frame of art, But there's a couple of just to go back to Ernie Hudson really quick. He's Lieutenant Albrecht, who J.O.R. named him after Albrecht Dürer, which is a pen and ink artist that was his favorite artist, like old school, a long time ago. But he improvised the scene where they're in the apartment and you still have your hat on. Like most of that scene is completely improvised between the two. And like when he says, "I'm really sorry," when he's walking out, "I'm really sorry about you and your fiance," and he's like, "Yeah," and then he leaves. It's like that could have been, he could have chewed up the scenery and said something else, but it was just like, like it would. Both of them showed restraint in their improvisational skills in that scene in such a good way.
He brings such a great humanity to the film by casting Ernie Hudson, because he brings that sort of like, he's like the everyman. He's the good guy. He's, he was there. But he's got to put up with this shit, right? He's got to, deal with this crap every single day. And that was a really great choice of casting right there, I think. Yeah,
because he's got a calm demeanor and not a believer, but not also surprised. Not also surprised.
Yeah, he's
by
not
anything
surprised,
that happens.
right?
It's like kind of like, okay,
right. He's like having a conversation with it, and he's not like trying to debunk it. He's like
I'm talking to a ghost. Are you a ghost?
Not real. You're not. Yeah, he's not saying
that's when
any of that.
Cracks open the beer. Brandon Lee's like, have a beer.
That's exactly to Andy's point. It's the conversation is so
normal,
so economical in a sense too. It's like really pared down, almost haiku in a sense. It's like just very few words exchanged.
But also, very matter of factly, not like explain to me about how this happened. He's kind of like, okay, the guy's not dead anymore. And then he's talking about what happened to him. So it's it's a very interesting take on it, where he didn't freak out and get all crazy. And
he tells him what happened. He's like, you asked, man. Hey, you asked, I love that, so there's just
him getting really the memories like leads to my least favorite part of the movie. You mentioned yours earlier. I am head over heels for this movie. There's only one thing that always felt a little cheap to me, and that was that with the right script, with the right words and the right camera angles and the right budget, I think that they ran out of money at the very, very end. When he's on the roof with Top Dollar and he's like 30 hours of pain, and then he's dead and the movie's over. And it's like, okay, it's like very quick. It's just like falls down. And then, so it's like, I feel like they could have him touching, and then like you see longer flashbacks and like the pain, and see him get more and more razzled and like, and then something else happened. But it's so fast. And he just kind of tumbles and lands on a gargoyle. I
slides off the roof and...
Yeah, I feel like that they gave him it was kind of a cheap ending, and the rest was great. It's just that one shot, like the payoff could have been so dramatic, and I think that they kind of dropped the ball. They didn't have the budget to do it, I think.
Yeah, and it was an interest that that part of the movie. The movie actually essentially ends after Skank gets killed. Skank finally does get killed when he's at Top Dollar's lair, as it were. And kind of technically the movie ends because he completed his mission as far as he knew. He completed his mission and was going back he was actually at his gravesite and
he says goodbye to Sarah. Yeah.
And there's also another character called Sarah, who's a young girl, and she was a friend of the couple. And she kind of narrates the whole story as it were as well. She gets kidnapped by Top Dollar. They find out that she was an acquaintance. So he gets called back in. And that's where Andy was talking about also the subplot of, if he's helping people or doing something outside of his mission, he's vulnerable and he's kind of can be hurt. And so then they had this whole thing where if you can get the crow or hurt the crow, he's hurt too. But I think it ties into the original subplot where if he's doing something outside of his mission, he's vulnerable. So he goes to save Sarah and he gets shot and he gets messed up and he's absolutely subject to getting hurt.
And this is where that mysticism that we were talking about between, Michael Wincott's character and Bai Ling, she knows this. You know, somehow she just knows that if you get the bird, his powers will be, whatever. So there's you get the sense that there's some kind of like a cult thing going on where she has some knowledge of what's happening. She's not surprised by it. You see the look on her face every time he shows up. Especially, she's got that sour look on her face.
She's nonplussed. I mean, she's not like
it's
impressed.
Almost like she's expecting this. Like she's like, kind of thing. So it's
she's
like
making incense out of people's eyes and kind of making little smoke things, and she's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So yeah, they have a little bit of an extreme lifestyle in what they do, but yeah, they're definitely on that edge, on that side of like the weird stuff, and
right.
But again, within their universe, it's weird, and then someone comes that's even stranger, and it kind of validates all that stuff that she believes, as with. Yeah. Oh, she's almost like a seer or a prophet. Like, oh, do this, and he's after this, and if we get the crow, you could take his power. And she had like one of the feathers or something.
Did you guys get the sense though that did you catch that right away that he got weak anytime did that needed to be pointed out to you at some point?
I didn't get it until later on when I was an adult. Yeah, there's an interesting subplot in the book on top of all of this, but the crow isn't a physical crow in the book. It's like it's in his mind. It's like a spirit guide sort of thing or whatever. And the only other person to see the crow in the book is Top Dollar, because he had killed everybody. Like I said at the beginning, it was on the side of the road in the middle of like a country road somewhere. He had killed all the rest of the guys except for Top Dollar. Top Dollar gets in the car and drives off to escape or whatever. But the crow manifests itself, like shows itself to Top Dollar, and he freaks out and flips the car, and it flips the car right where it all began, the story began. So I thought that was pretty cool. The only time anybody sees the crow is the crow showing up to help him kill the last person.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that as well until I think I read like the behind the scenes thing, because it's not really stated.
Yeah.
And like Andy said, but you do notice where one scene Eric is in regular clothing, and then the next scene his whole torso is wrapped up with electrical or duct tape, and he's got all this duct tape around him, and it's like, well, what happened? Because that whole subplot was cut out about what happens if you help the living or people that are not associated with quote unquote the mission.
Yeah, because Proyas said in his comment, he said it could have been done better. Like he doesn't know whether or not that came across to people. That's why I asked the question.
I don't think it did. I don't think I was. I think I wouldn't have realized it unless if I hadn't read it, because they kind of address it at the end where he gets shot, and Ernie Hudson's like, I thought you couldn't get killed, and he's like, well, apparently not, or apparently things have changed. So even his character didn't understand. In this cut of the movie, even the Crow character did not understand what was happening to him. Whereas in the movie, they had that filmed subplot with the cowboy saying, stop that, or stay on your mission, or, don't help people because it's going to, it's detrimental. So I think what we're left with, though, is still something that is just visually stunning. I mean, when I watched it again, it just really, I haven't seen it in so long. And just the whole, the visual of it, the visual feel is so 90s, but I don't think you could make this move. They're talking about remakes. They've talked about remakes. They're trying to, supposedly Jason Momoa was most recently attached, and then he got unattached to it, and they're trying to reboot it. And I think James O'Barr is actually going to be involved in it. And first he didn't want to be, but now he does. I'm not sure that this is a movie that needs to be remade. What are you going to say? Just because of the circumstances surrounding Brandon Lee. I mean, unfortunately, it's those two. What happened on the film and the subject matter of the film, I think, are tied together forever now. You can't pull them apart, and I think that's why the sequels didn't do as much. Because they were cheap knockoffs, and there was just it was just kind of more of a cash in. Yeah. I don't know. You should revisit this. What do you think?
They brought in, Jay O'Barr was brought in like he wasn't going to do it, and he talked like before. Hollywood sat him down and said, here's what we're going to do, and you'll have to deal with it. And this time they said, sit down, tell us what you need. And he said, well, if you're going to remake this movie, make my book. Just make my book. And they promised that in writing, like in blood, if we reboot this movie, this newer version of the movie, we will do shot for shot, like storyboards with the Skull Cowboy, with the weird horse with barbed wire and all this. And like he was saying that there were shots in the storyboards that do the same thing, where it's like there's a beautiful scene, cut to a chair, then cut to something, some poetry. You know, it was going to be like shot for shot. So he was on board because they said, "Well, we
They'd be
promise you,
faithful." Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be a faithful rendition of the graphic novel. What do you think, Eric? I don't know. I'm still on the fence. Even if they go back and redo it, I just think it's tied to such a tragic event. You know, and that's what it's a weird thing to say. Kind of makes the movie special.
Well, that's for me. It's definitely Brandon's baby. It's his film. It's his spirit is there, and to do any attempt to make it, whether it's good or bad. I mean, I remake it is just, of course, it's not going to be quite have the same. Well, like I said, spirit to it. It's not going to have the same kind of feeling. It's only going to be very effects driven, we can make these things happen, cut to a chair, we could do this, we could do that, but it's just not going to be, it won't have the same the physicality, the visceral, the absolute performance that Brandon brought to it. I don't care who they get to play in this thing, it just won't be the same. And I don't want to sound Luddite by saying that, but it's just it just, there are certain things you don't mess with, like you want to get a sense that there are certain things that you just can leave alone. And I think that's the way it should be. Yeah.
Right.
It's very much a story. It's very much a story of its time too. Like it is tied to the mid 90s. Like, I can't, it would have, if it would have made in 86, it would have been horrible.
Yep.
If it was made, we've seen what happens when it's made and every year after 94. So, yeah.
If it was made in the mid 80s, Charlie Sheen would have been in it instead. And you would have gotten something totally different. Okay. So you know what, as we wrap up, why don't we go around, what was your one favorite scene? So Eric, what would you have a favorite scene that is just kind of like,
I think I do like the first kill. I love the Tintin scene the best, cause he's just coming into this, he's that pain that he feels. He's just so disoriented. He doesn't know what's going on. Why am I here? And then from going from that to his very first kill, and then just kind of coming into it, getting to the confidence that he gets, like as the fight's going on, you can see Tintin getting the upper hand in a sense, and then but then he gets up and then he's like boom, he's like unleashed. Kind of thing. So I think that's probably my favorite cool. scene. That and probably the scene with Darla where he tells her, because that's the first moment of vulnerability and the humanity that's coming out there. So but there
Andy?
it is.
It always gives me goosebumps, the scene where he comes back to the apartment and the Cure song starts playing and he starts putting the makeup on and stuff and smashes the mirror. And like, he's not even in the scene. Brandon Lee's not even in the scene, but like it's that entire, they do take two shots from previous scenes or whatever and like fracture it in the mirror of him crying, like weeping. And that just, it's got the spirit of the book. The spirit of the book is just pain and sorrow and remorse and mourning. And he's there. He's still there. He's confused. He doesn't know why he's there, but he's there. And it's just like, and at that point, he's realizing this is what I need to do. And he gets angry. It's like goes from sadness to anger. And then the crescendo, the drums and the Cure song, bam, it's so powerful. I love that. I love that scene so much.
Wow. I'm going to go with the whole Gideon's scene. I really like that because it kind of, first of all, you've got John Polito as Gideon, who we didn't really talk about. Really, such a great character actor, and you needed him. You needed a pro for Brandon Lee to act off of. But it's such a good scene. It's and up to and including when he meets Albrecht afterwards, because there's also a kind of sadness about it. So in the first part of the scene, he goes to Gideon's pawn shop. He's looking for Fun Boy, and he's also looking for his engagement ring. So it's kind of like, he's got a lot of contempt for this guy as well, even though he's not part of the mission per se. He finds the box of rings. He's like, every one of these is a life that you helped ruin or take, just the contempt for him there. And then after it blows up and Albrecht catches him, then he's got kind of like a moment of reflection and despair. These people are already dead. They just don't know it yet, and it's just kind of, and then he recognizes Albrecht, so it's just I think it was just a great character developing scene also, of just kind of getting the character kind of centered and not just a killing machine, but he was also trying to find out what happened. And he knew that he had a connection to these items. And if he could find items, that would help him kind of remember and recall. So I kind of really dug that whole Gideon scene, because it was some action, but it was a lot of talk and just kind of scene building and character building. So I really dug that. So
cool. James O'Barr is in that scene.
He's the looter.
He's a looter, yeah.
He's a looter. He's the looter that Albrecht kind of turns around and goes after, and then Brandon Lee can skedaddle and get out of there.
The physicality of Brandon Lee is on display in that scene and a couple of other scenes where he brings some comedy. Like he could have just walked in and shot him or whatever, but he jumps up, flips, and hangs upside down and hits him on the head with a baseball bat. Like, Mr. Gideon, bonk. But there's also other parts when like when everybody's got guns or whatever, and he kind of just like puts his hands up and dances off the shot, and sends T-Bird off in the car. He just kind of waves with two fingers.
Yeah.
Like, bye-bye,
Gives him a bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of almost not taking it serious, or like almost like a not a sadistic delight, but maybe like kind of this is that's what it is. He's just kind of like this is happening and we're doing it, and and then after the T-Bird scene, he gets the lighter fluid and draws his crow and lighter fluid on the ground and lights it up. So all in all, this is such a great, like I said, it's kind of melancholy, it's bittersweet. It's sad, it's tragic, but it's also a great film from stylistic choices, set pieces to acting. Brandon Lee, unfortunately, he only made like 2 other films before this. Did some TV stuff with kung fu reboots. The life of what could have been, and to capture this performance on celluloid is something special. And it's certainly not a horror film. So we're doing Halloween, but this is certainly not a horror film. I don't know where it falls maybe into the gothic thing. I don't know that it's an action film either. I really don't know where this sits. It's not sci-fi.
Revenge fantasy, maybe?
Fantasy. Yeah. It certainly is. It certainly isn't the horror thing, and it's certainly not the blood and gore and the guts. But it is a special film that we loved and wanted to share and make sure, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. If you have seen it, I haven't seen it in a long time, revisit it, because when I did, I'm like, again, I always see some different things or pick up on different things that I liked. And I found a couple of other things. And of course, great performances. He's backed by, like I said, the cast of Ernie Hudson and John Polito and Michael Wincott. All these guys are pros. In the 90s, these guys were everywhere back then. Not so much nowadays, but back then this was a movie obviously built for the 90s. And like Andy said, the soundtrack is of its time as well. Absolutely right in the middle of 94, 93, the whole grunge thing. This was tailor-made for people of that. Like you said, it goes hand in hand. It definitely goes hand in hand with the MTV generation.
It was proto Matrix almost, but most of the actors quit after this movie for at least a year. Like they didn't want anything to do with Hollywood anymore. The woman who played Brandon's fiance just quit acting altogether. And I think
Michael Massey also, he's the one that unfortunately fired the prop gun. He plays Fun Boy. Something very he left acting for a while, needed to get himself sorted out. He would return. He would do a lot of side. He passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, but not an easy thing to live with. But he did end up coming back. He was in The Game, David Fincher's The Game with Michael.
That's
Michael
right.
Douglas.
Yeah.
He was in at the very end. He was like an ambulance guy. But absolutely check this movie out. This is one for the ages. We love it. It was The Crow. Andy Cremeans, thank you for joining us for this episode.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. and if you want to thank Andy, go to Andrew Cremeans Art on Instagram. Give him a like, see what he's got going on. There's got a lot of great artwork. Check it out. And he's very, he just does great work. And Spooky Empire is coming up. He just sneak previewed some of the artwork for that, which was really neat. So absolutely check him out. It's a delight to have you as a three-peater.
Yeah. Third time's a charm.
Anytime, I'm happy to do it. I love the show, so I'm stoked to be here.
Awesome.
I think I'd like to go ahead and say, let's just go ahead and dedicate this episode to the memory of Brandon Lee. Let's just throw that out there.
Cheers.
Cheers. Just not be. It
Absolutely.
wouldn't be the same film without him. So it is his movie. Well, 100%. So.
Well said. Well
Yep.
said. And on that note, we are going to leave it there for the 3324 podcast. Thank you for joining us. You can find us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast, on Twitter at 3324p. So for the multi-talented Andrew Cremeans, for Eric Kuber, multi-talented as well, I'm singular talented Dean Legiro. We will catch you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.